If stories of courage, redemption, and unexpected love born in the rough edges of the American frontier pull you in, then this tale will grip you from the very first moment. At Western Horizons, we bring you powerful Wild West journeys where wounded souls find hope in the unlikeliest of places. Today's story follows a man who dared to defy injustice and a woman who learned to trust again, shaping a future neither believed possible. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Western Horizons and step into a world where every horizon carries a new story worth hearing. In the New Mexico Territory of 1876, the wind carried dust across the open plains, swirling it into small clouds that clung to clothing and settled onto every surface like a reminder of the land's harshness. Zachary Monroe had seen more of the territory than most men his age. A former Union soldier turned rancher, he had carved out a life of quiet independence far from the noise and destruction of the war he once fought in. His ranch sat several miles from town, tucked between rolling hills and the dry riverbed that only filled during heavy rains. He had planned nothing more than a simple trip into town that morning, some supplies, a conversation with the blacksmith about shoeing his horse, and maybe a drink before heading back. But as he rode into the dusty streets, he sensed something different in the air. There was a tension, a stillness, as though the town itself was holding its breath. A crowd had gathered near the center, tightly packed, voices low and urgent. It wasn't the usual commotion of a market day, nor the cheerful bustle of travelers stopping to rest their horses. This was something darker, he could feel it before he even saw it. Zachary guided his horse closer, frowning as he caught words drifting from the gathered crowd. A few men stood on a wooden platform, and one of them, broad-shouldered with a mean glint in his eye, held a rope tied around a woman's wrists. Zachary's stomach tightened. He knew immediately what he was witnessing, and the realization sent a cold anger threading through his veins. Slavery had been outlawed years before. The war had ended. He had fought in it, bled in it, to help carve out a new future. Yet here, in some forgotten pocket of the West, cruelty still clung stubbornly to life. The woman on the platform stood trembling, her hands bound, her dress worn thin and frayed from long suffering. She looked young, far too young to carry the exhaustion etched into her face. Beneath the loose fabric, Zachary noticed the unmistakable swell of pregnancy. She clutched her arms close to her belly, as though shielding her unborn child from the eyes of the crowd. Her name, the auctioneer barked, was Zara Patterson. No last name that tied her to a family. No story allowed to explain how she had come here. Just a body presented to be bought and sold. Zachary felt something deep within him snap. Not a sudden burst of reckless impulse, but a controlled, heated certainty. He had seen war. He had seen good men die for the sake of freedom. And he would not stand here, silent, while a woman, especially a pregnant one, was dragged into more suffering by men who treated cruelty like sport. The auctioneer raised his voice, calling for bids, pretending what they were doing was normal, legal, or anything short of monstrous. A few men shouted numbers, their eyes gleaming with selfish desire or simple wickedness. Zara kept her gaze fixed on the ground, but even from the distance, Zachary could see the fear trembling through her body. He did not think. He simply spoke. His voice cut clean through the noise. 200. It was high, deliberately high. The crowd went silent. Heads turned. Even the auctioneer paused, surprised by the interruption. Zachary pushed through the men at the front, his step steady, his gaze unflinching. He saw Zara lift her head slightly, her eyes searching for the source of the voice. The auctioneer tried to recover, shouting for higher bids, but the moment had cracked. The men who had bid before shifted uncomfortably, uneasy under Zachary's hard stare. None of them felt strongly enough to challenge him, not when they realized he wasn't making an offer for ownership, but a statement against the entire cruel spectacle. When no one countered, the auctioneer reluctantly dropped his hand and muttered, "Sold." The anger in his voice betrayed his frustration at being outmaneuvered. Zachary ignored him. He stepped onto the platform, his boots thudding against the wood. Zara stiffened when he approached, unsure whether this man was another captor wearing a better face. Zachary didn't touch her immediately. He first turned to the man holding the rope and demanded the papers, proof of her sale, yes, but more importantly, proof that she was now legally free. The man begrudgingly handed them over, sneering as though Zachary's actions were a personal insult. Once the papers were secure in his coat, Zachary faced Zara fully. Her eyes were dark, wide, and frightened, but beneath the fear, there was something else, a spark so small that it flickered like a candle in a storm, but there nonetheless. "You're free now," he said quietly. "No one owns you. You walk away from here as your own person." Zara blinked rapidly, as though struggling to comprehend the words. Freedom had been a distant dream for so long that hearing it aloud felt unreal. Zachary reached out, not to grab her but to gently untie the rope around her wrists. She flinched at first, expecting pain, but when she felt only the careful pressure of his fingers loosening the knot, her shoulders sagged with relief. When the rope fell away, she looked down at her hands, red, raw, trembling. Slow tears gathered in her eyes, not loud or dramatic, just soft and exhausted. Zachary waited patiently. He didn't tell her to hurry. He didn't tell her where to go. He knew enough about trauma to understand that freedom, though beautiful, could also be terrifying at first. Finally, Zara whispered, her voice hoarse from silence and fear. Why did you help me?" Zachary considered the question. There were many reasons swirling inside him, some simple, some complicated. But he settled on the truth that mattered most. "No one deserves to be treated like that," he said gently. "Not you. Not your child." Zara's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, as though to protect the life growing there. The gesture made Zachary's chest tighten with something like fierce protectiveness. Not because she belonged to him, but because no woman, no human being, should carry fear while carrying a child. The crowd began to disperse slowly, unsure how to react to Zachary's intervention. Some grumbled. Some avoided his gaze. Others simply pretended they hadn't been there. The auctioneer muttered threats under his breath, but he would not challenge the situation openly. He knew Zachary's reputation as a man who didn't back down easily. Zachary placed the papers gently in Zara's hands. She held them as though they were something fragile and precious, her freedom written in ink, finally hers to claim. But she did not walk away. Instead, she looked up at him with uncertainty. Freedom meant choice, yes, but also fear. Where would she go? How could she protect her child? How would she survive? Zachary saw those questions in her eyes, even if she didn't voice them. He took a slow breath before speaking again. "I'm heading back to my ranch," he said in a calm, even tone. "It's a few miles from here. If you want a place to rest, just rest, you're welcome. No expectations. No obligations. Just safety until you decide what you want to do." Zara didn't answer immediately. She studied him, searching for deception. But his expression remained steady, offering respect, not pressure. When she finally nodded, it was small and hesitant, but it held the weight of trust being born in the quiet space between them. Zachary helped her down from the platform, guiding her slowly so she wouldn't stumble. She leaned into him only slightly, her balance unsteady from fear and exhaustion. When they reached his horse, he helped her mount carefully, keeping one hand on her arm to steady her. As they rode away from the town, Zara in front of him, safe in the circle of his arms, Zachary felt the world shift in subtle but profound ways. He had come for supplies. Instead, he was leaving with a woman who had known nothing but suffering, her unborn child, and a silent vow he hadn't yet spoken aloud but already felt forming deep within him. He didn't know how their lives would intertwine from this moment forward. He didn't know what challenges they would face or how the shadows of her past, or his, might follow them. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The moment he stepped into that crowd, everything changed. Not just for Zara. Not just for her child. but for him as well. And neither of them would ever be the same again. Zachary brought Zara back to his ranch with a gentleness that surprised even him, guiding her through the gate as if crossing that line meant leaving behind every cruel hand that had ever held her down. The house itself wasn't grand, just a sturdy timber structure built with patient hands and long days, but it felt like a fortress compared to the life she had been taken from. At first, Zara stepped inside cautiously, eyes drifting to the corners, as though expecting ghosts or danger to rise from the shadows. Trauma had taught her to brace for the worst even in silence, and Zachary, seeing that, made sure not to rush her. He spoke softly when he needed to speak at all, made space for her when she needed it, and let her choose her own pace for healing. The ranch hands were told in clear, unshakable terms that the lady in his care was to be treated with respect, kindness, and the highest measure of decency humanly possible. No exceptions, no excuses. In the first few days, Zara rarely spoke more than a few sentences. Not because she didn't have anything to say, but because the words felt locked behind years of swallowing terror and sorrow. Zachary never demanded conversation, he only offered it as a bridge whenever she seemed ready. She watched him from the porch sometimes as he worked, repairing fences, tending to the horses, checking the fields, and she found herself studying him the way someone studies a safe place they can't quite believe is real. His movements were steady, patient, not driven by anger or fear, but by a quiet will that came from a man who had seen too much of the world and decided to build something better in spite of it. Food slowly became one of the first comforts she allowed herself. In the evenings, Zachary prepared simple meals, beans simmered with smoked bacon, skillet cornbread, roasted vegetables from the small garden. When he placed the plates on the table, he didn't push conversation, he didn't ask questions about her past, and he didn't linger on the things he suspected might bring her pain. Instead, he spoke about the ranch, the weather, the horses, topics that demanded nothing from her except presence. She responded in soft answers at first, but with each passing day, her voice steadied, the tremble fading, the look of guarded fear slowly unraveling into something warmer. At night, when the wind swept across the land, the logs in the hearth would crackle with a comforting glow, and Zara began spending a little more time by the fire, sitting across from Zachary in a quiet that no longer suffocated her. There was solace in those moments, a shared stillness between two souls carrying wounds that couldn't be seen but were felt all too deeply. Sometimes she would rest her hands over her stomach, where the child she carried shifted gently, and Zachary would glance her way with a look she couldn't quite decipher, one that held concern, hope, and an unspoken promise she hadn't earned but somehow received anyway. Months passed, and with each sunrise, the walls Zara had built to survive started easing down. She helped around the ranch in small ways, folding linens, watering the garden, brushing the old gelding who seemed to sense her moods better than most people ever had. The other ranch hands treated her with the respect Zachary demanded, but it was more than obligation, her quiet resilience grew on them, and they soon regarded her as someone worth protecting. Slowly, laughter began finding its way back into her life. It came softly at first, startled, like a bird testing its wings, but the first time Zachary heard it, he felt something open inside him, something he'd forgotten he could feel. One evening, after a long day of mending fences, Zachary sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. Zara joined him, settling into the rocker beside his, and they watched the sun dip behind the mountains, painting the land with streaks of gold and ember. She spoke more freely then, telling him about the life she had lost, not in detail, some things were still too painful, but enough to share the weight she had carried. Zachary listened without interruption, his jaw tightening only when anger flared at the injustice of it all. But he never let that anger touch her. Instead, he offered understanding, even when words weren't enough. As her pregnancy progressed, Zachary became more attentive, almost instinctively. He would bring her water during hot afternoons, make sure she wasn't exerting herself too much, and help her up or down steps without making her feel helpless. She noticed everything, his care, his patience, the way he always paused before touching her, giving her time to say no. It changed something in her. It made her trust him, not out of necessity but out of genuine belief that he was a man who saw her as a person deserving of dignity. The night her labor began, a summer storm rolled across the plains. Lightning flashed, thunder grumbled, and Zara felt the first sharp wave of pain tear through her. Zachary stayed at her side from the first cry to the last, helping her breathe, holding her hand when she needed strength, and stepping back when she needed space. It was a long night, a grueling one, but when the child, a baby boy with a strong cry, was finally placed into Zara's trembling arms, she broke into tears that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with freedom. Zachary watched her cradle the child, awe softening every line of his face. When Zara looked up at him, she whispered the boy's name, Isaiah, and invited him to meet the newborn she now trusted him to protect. In that moment, something solidified between them, something neither could deny. It wasn't obligation, nor was it pity. It was the beginning of a family. In the weeks that followed, the ranch changed. It wasn't just a place to live anymore, it became a sanctuary. Travelers, outcasts, those wronged by lawless men, they found their way to Zachary and Zara's gate, drawn by stories whispered from town to town. Stories of a ranch where mercy existed, where justice mattered, where people who had suffered could find rest. Zara, once afraid to even step beyond the porch, began welcoming women who carried the same kinds of scars she once bore. She helped them heal, offering them reassurance, strength, and a living example of what survival looked like. Zachary took on a different role in the community too. He had never been a man who sought attention, but people came to him with conflicts, asking for guidance, hoping for fairness in decisions others twisted with prejudice. He never claimed authority, but his presence alone seemed to settle disputes and remind people of their better selves. Together, Zachary and Zara became pillars, quiet, steady, unwavering. As Isaiah grew, toddling through the yard with his mother chasing behind him, the ranch echoed with new life. And though the outside world still carried prejudice, old hatred didn't stand unchallenged here. When men arrived one day questioning Zara's presence, insinuating that her place wasn't among them, Zachary stepped forward with a resolve that cut through the tension like steel. He made it clear that anyone challenging her dignity challenged him as well. That moment spread across the territory faster than wildfire, news of a ranch that did not tolerate cruelty, a family built on courage instead of fear. Years passed, but the bond between Zachary and Zara only deepened. She fell in love with the man he was, steady, compassionate, unshakable, and he fell in love with the woman she became, resilient, warm, fierce in her hope. Their home became a living testament to what could happen when two broken souls chose healing over bitterness, love over fear. By the time the community around them had changed, softened, grown, the Monroe Ranch had become more than land and timber. It had become a haven, proof that even in a harsh world, humanity could bloom in the unlikeliest of places. And it all began the day one man refused to look away from another person's suffering, choosing instead to step forward and change both their destinies forever.